Welcome to the AM Update, Week in Review. A collection of the best moments from Aaron McIntyre's morning update.
FBI Director Kash Patel, along with Deputy Director Dan Bongino, sat down for their first joint interview with Fox News' Maria Bartiromo to discuss what they're actually doing at the FBI and to ask for even more patience and assure people they really are trying to accomplish something massive. Listen to this.
Well, Dan, throughout the Russia collusion story and the rest.
Look, I can speak to the folks that were in our seats, our predecessors, and they intentionally failed the American public by putting on the biggest DC deception game we've ever seen. They said the FBI was the most storied institution for law enforcement, and it was, and it will be again very soon. But when the likes of Comey and McCabe and Strzok and company came in here with the James Bakers of the world and intentionally lied to a federal court only to rig a presidential election by lying to the American public and using taxpayer dollars, likely illegally, to fund this entire operation and then withhold exculpatory information from a federal court that I used to appear before to manhunt terrorists, that's what broke the FBI. And then when they were caught, they lied about it. And you and a few others like Dan and others were brave enough to cover it 6, 7, 8 years ago. And we're still talking about it today because as Congress is working rigorously with us, the Crossfire Hurricane documents are coming fast and hard. And they're being sent there unredacted so we can have full accountability. And that's how you restore what the trust that was lost to the American public when it comes to the FBI.
Yeah, but come on, Director, with all due respect, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I've been demanding accountability for many, many years. One of you mentioned Comey, Strzok, and the rest. They've got TV shows. They've got media platforms. They're fine. There's been no accountability.
Well, look, it's a fair criticism, but what I will tell people is we weren't here in the FBI in the last 5 years when we had statute of limitations that were still in play, where we could have investigated criminal conduct. Most of these statute of limitations are 5 years old. And we will investigate criminal conduct where we find a righteous case to do so, and the law and the facts allow us to. But a lot of it we're precluded from. So we'll take the criticism, and it's rightfully so. Like, could we have done more in the past? Sure, people before us could have. But what we can do now is continue to put out the documents and the information that these people withheld from the American public. And I'm just telling you right now, as much as we know about Crossfire Hurricane, he and I just found out more last week. And we're continuing to work with Congress to put those documents out. That's how vindictive and vicious the former leadership structure here was. Not only did they bastardize the FISA process and lie to the American public, they withheld and hid documentation and put it in rooms where people weren't supposed to look. And it's a good thing we're here now to clean it up, and you're about to see a wave of transparency.
As FBI Director Kash Patel saying that a wave of accountability is coming and to be patient. I pray he is correct there, and I really do pray that. And I pray that this is not just all stick, no carrot. And I think we should continue to pray for people like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. Dan Bongino didn't leave a very successful career in the media space just to go tits up, basically, at the FBI. I can't believe that he would do something like that. So I really do believe I'm simultaneously frustrated with the lack of arrests, but also very sympathetic to the position that both of these men are in. And I've been very consistent about the fact that maybe of all the corrupt swamp institutions, the FBI takes the cake every day and twice on Sunday. So they are up against a Leviathan here, and they're asking for patience, and I'm willing to extend that still. And I just hope that we do get results, at least eventually.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at Real AM Update.
This is the World Economic Forum's resident philosopher, Yuval Noah Harari, who posted this over the weekend, quote, "Nothing in nature has a purpose, and nothing that exists is unnatural. Happy International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia," end quote. He attached this video along with it.
Darwin is the kind of prophet of sexual liberation. If I think about the liberation of gay people, of LGBTQ people, then if you dig underneath, you eventually find Darwin. For centuries upon centuries, gay people were persecuted and oppressed because of this mythological idea about sex that sex was created by God for the purpose of procreation. And if you use sex for anything else, you're sinning against the purpose of the thing, so you must be punished. And then Darwin came, and Darwin said, in biology, there are no purposes. Nothing has any purpose in biology. In biology, there are only causes.
We found a brutally honest left-winger. Yuval Noah Harari, World Economic Forum's philosopher-in-chief, I like to call him, explaining, honestly so, that Charles Darwin's work on Darwinian evolution, he was the progenitor of the modern sexual deviancy that we see right now. That is very honest. That is something that people on the right, if they are being bold, that's something that they've been saying for decades, and finally Yuval Noah Harari is saying the quiet part out loud. Life has no purpose, and that's the justification we have for why we get to groom your children. Now, comparing that to the Christian worldview, on some level, is disrespectful of Christianity. Because the Christian worldview is that, well, of course, God exists. Greater love hath no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friends. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. You know, that's the Christian worldview. You lose your life to gain it. You know, those are Christian worldviews. But this, it's the Stranger Things upside down version of that. This is the real, let me read this again. This is the caption he sent along with that video. Nothing in nature has a purpose, and nothing that exists is unnatural. So he's saying everything that exists is natural, and nothing natural has a purpose. That means nothing has a purpose. We're all just randomly circling around the sun. Therefore, since there is no purpose, there is no law. Certainly no higher law. And that's the justification, all the justification we need philosophically for homosexual, bisexual, transsexual behavior. That's his message. In moments like these, I have to take a step back. Are people like Yuval Noah Harari, are they just flexing? Or is it just a mask-off moment? They slipped up and they said what they really, truly believe, and whoopsie-doopsie, it's me, Satan. Or is it a flex, like I said? Is it a flex? They are so comfortable. They know they have no fear of being shamed, of being punished, of being held accountable for these wicked beliefs, these wicked lines of thought. They fear not being ostracized, so they're just flexing. Look, it's me, the devil. I'm going to do what I want. This is what I believe. And what are you going to do to stop me? Or are these moments, maybe the third option here, are these moments because they are afraid? Do they feel threatened by something that they feel happening, like a revival? Like maybe there's something about to come around the corner that's finally going to stand up to them after a generation or more, really going on 2 generations now, of this level of ideology, harmful ideology, largely going unopposed in the West. And they know, at least for the time being, they've exhausted their lies, deception, and cruelty. And so they just have to be honest about who they are. You know, the World Economic Forum there, and Klaus Schwab, he's stepping away. He was accused of misappropriation of resources. That's his baby. That's something he's created and been with for almost 50 years. You think he's just going to let that thing go? No, he's going to burn the whole thing down with him. So from Yuval Noah Harari's perspective, being the resident philosopher there at the World Economic Forum, he might feel a little threatened right now. He might feel a little threatened, and that's why he's being honest.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at Real AM Update.
So you heard Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel just out and out tell the MSNBC left-wing audience he believes there's no way in heck that Joe Biden just had this turbo cancer develop in the last 4 months or so. Well, here's Dr. Drew Pinsky on Dana Lash's show saying much the same thing, except to a right-wing audience.
This is when I was reading about former President Biden's diagnosis. So out of 1 out of 10 on the Gleason scale, he's got a 9 in terms of it being aggressive. It's metastasizes in his bones.
Yes.
That sounds very serious, but it also is that indicative of it being a long-term problem? What does that tell you when it's at that stage?
If it were some man that walked into my office who hadn't been evaluated in 5 years, and I found an elevated PSA and a nodule on his prostate, and lo and behold, we biopsy it, it's cancer, we do a bone scan, we find Mets. No, okay, that's maybe 5% of cases, 2% if it's somebody being followed regularly, that it would present all of a sudden on a metastatic basis. That did not happen here. In fact, when my spidey sense started going up is when they said, oh, we noticed a nodule. Oh, lo and behold, it's metastatic. No. First of all, the digital rectal exam has largely been abandoned these days. We follow the PSA. The idea that the President of the United States was not getting a PSA at least annually does not pass the sniff test.
Wow.
His PSA was up. They biopsied it. They found it. I don't know if they treated it or not initially, but one of the really interesting aspects of treatment of metastatic prostate cancer is the stepwise approach includes what's called androgen deprivation therapy, for which the common side effect is cognitive slowing, muscle loss, falls. Lo and behold, we have certainly seen that in the last 2 years.
So there are two doctors, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, as well as Dr. Drew Pinsky, talking to very different audiences, coming from very different political perspectives, saying pretty much the exact same thing. And when it comes to Dr. Drew Pinsky, I heard him on a different interview yesterday. I heard him talking about all of the side effects that come from androgen deprivation therapy. And all those side effects line up exactly 1-to-1 with what we've seen from who we were told was the commander-in-chief the previous 4 years. That is a yo. Who was really running our country? This is the biggest and most fake rise to power that I've ever seen. And maybe we ever will see. And I think we might be sitting on the biggest scandal in American history. My wife was telling me about this new trend among Gen Z parents that has to do with how to raise them when they are babies. And to sum it up, it's basically the babies should never cry movement, if you want to call it that. I'm not sure how widespread that is, but to the extent that it is widespread at all, I was listening to her tell me about this, and I thought that needs to be addressed. Now, I am not a parenting guru. I do have 2 children of myself, but they are very young. So you can take this with as big of a grain of salt as you would like. But I was listening to her explain this phenomenon. Essentially this means babies should never cry. It's parents, mothers in particular, who are attempting to make sure, just like it sounds like, their baby is never crying. Because apparently, if they're crying, it always means something is wrong. And they're going to be, I don't know, the connection, the parental relationship connection, anytime a baby is crying is being severed or something like that. It's pretty neurotic, in my opinion. And so if a baby starts to cry, immediately boob or bottle, or give them whatever they want in order to make them stop crying. I'm just telling you, that is not a good thing. Now, going back to what Hillary Clinton was talking about, I hope and I pray that a lot of millennials and Gen Zers, I hope they start having kids and keep having kids. I think that's a good thing. But the basic idea is that if babies are crying, it means something is wrong. And usually that is the case. But it could mean anything is wrong. They could be hungry. Their butt could itch. They may not like the way that your hat is sitting on your head. It could be anything. That's the only way they know how to communicate. And when it comes to bedtime, crying babies, sometimes it's just a way for them to burn off energy before they go to sleep at night, if they are sleeping through the night. By this logic, however, and again, I'm just addressing this in case it's widespread, and you've got a son or daughter or daughter-in-law or son-in-law who engages in something that sounds like this. Or maybe you are in these shoes right now. I'm not saying this to diss you. I'm saying this to encourage you. Because by this logic, if your baby ever cries, it means you're a bad parent. And that's just not the case. You're putting way too much pressure on yourself. Actually, elevating yourself. You can't. It's another human being. You can't control them 100%. And number two, this line of thinking will always lead to permissive parenting. When they are a baby, when they are an infant, newborn, what have you, of course they have different needs at different times. But if you take this line of thinking to its logical conclusion that crying is to be avoided at all costs, it always leads to permissive parenting because, as you know, if you've had kids, by the time they reach around 2.5, 3 years old, they figure out what? They figure out how to try to start manipulating mom and dad. And so if this is your outlook, that you are to avoid crying at all costs with your kid, it will lead to permissive parenting because as soon as they figure out that as soon as that sin nature starts to kick in, whenever that is, when they become a toddler, they will figure out that crying can get them whatever they want. Essentially, what you're teaching your kids from the moment they are an infant, where you start engaging in this, don't cry, I'll do whatever you want to get you to stop crying. What you're engaging is a lack of setting boundaries. And I can tell you this with good authority. This is something that I am very confident in. Not as a parenting guru, just as human nature and just understanding psychology at a basic level. If you want to meet miserable kids, they're kids that don't have boundaries. That's what this whole babies should never cry movement is creating. So I just want to say this to encourage you. Crying is okay. Crying is okay. And don't put that pressure on yourself. Again, if you've got a son or daughter, a grandson or granddaughter who are having babies now, you can be a big voice in their life to say, don't put that pressure on yourself. Okay. So again, I don't know how widespread this is, but to the extent that it is, Bella was telling me this is kind of a new thing in the trad wife space, whatever that actually is these days, amongst younger Gen Z and younger millennial and older Gen Z mothers right now. Don't put that pressure on yourself. That's all. On Patrol Live. It's like cops, cops, just following police officers and seeing them do their jobs on Friday and Saturday nights live. That's what it is. It's a lot of fun. Now, this show had its original iteration. It was called Live PD. I believe it was on A&E. And this show would actually follow police live, critique them even sometimes live in real time. And then St. George Floyd happened, and then that show got canceled. Thank you very much. In fact, in a place like Texas, in the aftermath of St. George Floyd's death, Governor Greg Abbott actually signed a bill into law that bans programs like On Patrol Live from making police-oriented documentaries in the state of Texas because racism or something. And Greg Abbott was just overtly trying to virtue signal. Anyway, a couple of years go by. The same production company that made On Patrol Live decided they wanted to do Live PD decided that they wanted to do a new show, basically a rip-off of the old one called On Patrol Live, and that's what we have now, except it's not quite the same. Again, thanks to St. George Floyd, this new program is just complete and total pro-police propaganda. Still very entertaining, but they never criticize the police officers on that show. For example, just the other night on Saturday night, there was a police officer from South Carolina towards the end of the show, so this is around 10:30 at night, who went on a completely naked, not naked like clothes off, but it was just nakedly a power trip against somebody. Now that somebody was being very disrespectful, was running their mouth, but this police officer stretched the definition of a law in a pretty obvious way and made it sound like he was pretty obvious that he was power tripping. The old version of this show, they would have critiqued that police officer, but not this new version of the show. They're not doing that. And again, thanks to George Floyd, it's now complete and total police propaganda. Nevertheless, they do have some interesting segments. And like I said, we love this show, even though we know it's pro-police propaganda, because we can critique it ourselves in real time, like I just did with that example from South Carolina. They have a segment called A Triple Play. And one of the segments, it just features really kind of eyebrow-raising police pursuits, police activity from around the country, not necessarily the departments that they're following. One of the segments that they aired this weekend came from New Mexico, where police officers responded to a call of two young boys, aged 7 and 9, who were just out in the open playing with a real loaded gun. Here's what that sounded like.
Go ahead and put it down for me, okay?
You're not in trouble, but you have to drop that and come talk to us, all right?
If there's a magazine inside the magazine well.
Put it down, baby.
They're playing with the gun back and forth. The one in the blue is trying to take it from the one in the orange.
Put it down, baby.
Just drop it, buddy.
Put it down, babe. You're
That's
okay.
just so bizarre. These kids are 7 and 9. They're in their pajamas. One of them is wearing Minecraft pajamas. The other is wearing Star Wars pajamas.
Down for me.
And they're just not listening to these police officers.
John, can you just toss it to the side, babe? Let's make this easy.
I feel like we could.
Because we want to help you. We want to help you.
I want to try to do a warning, something.
Put it down.
So it's around this time that police officers decide, hey, let's get out the less lethal.
I really don't want to record a kid right now.
Let's get out the less lethal rifle here and see if we can send a warning shot. And you could hear the officer say, I don't even want to fire a less lethal round at kids, at children, 7 to 9 years old.
40.
So there they fired a less lethal round. One of the kids, the younger kid, actually got the gun up and fired a shot at the police officers. But the child's gun thankfully malfunctioned. Fired another less lethal round.
Drop it now. Drop it, both of you.
So police officers were basically able to bum rush these two children and take them into custody. Now, the show On Patrol Live quickly revealed that where these kids are from, the house that they are from, I believe they said police had been there 50 times in recent years for various reasons. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. When they started talking about and kind of reviewing this case, the cast of On Patrol Live immediately started talking about, imagine yourself in the officer's shoes there, even firing a less lethal round. If you completely and seriously injure that kid, that's going to be with you for the rest of your life. Now, I recoiled when I heard, I think it was, I can't remember, it was Captain Tom Rizzo who said that. And I said, no, you don't have to do it this way. You could wait him out, maybe find another method. That's just completely taking the police officer's side, just kind of knee-jerk and from the word go. But then I thought, those kids had a real gun, and they fired a real bullet at these police officers who were trying to just tell them to drop the gun, and they'd be okay. In that case, if I were a police officer, I'm not going to deprive put a chance that I would deprive my own children of a father because somebody else's father sucks. Somebody else's parents suck. And obviously did not raise those kids correctly. So it's kind of a dilemma here. And not being in law enforcement, maybe less lethal is basically the only way to go there. Is there anything such as tear gas? Any other method? Could they have waited longer to try to negotiate with these children and try to get them to listen and obey? I think this is an interesting moral dilemma because, I mean, I've said this before. Being a police officer it's an impossible job. You are the cartilage in the knee between complete chaos and some semblance of order. It's an impossible job. Okay, so I totally understand that. I'm not trying to do police propaganda myself here. It's just a weather forecast. I'm kind of torn about this because on the one side, you know what? You don't have to do anything. You could have waited a little bit longer. Even a less lethal with children 7 and 9, that could be permanently damaging. But then on the other hand, like I said, why should I deprive my children of a father because another kid's father sucks at raising him? You see what I'm getting at here?
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at Real AM Update.
Poll of the week, I asked you if you were in the position of the police officers in that that crazy video out of New Mexico showing that 7 and 9-year-old playing with the loaded weapon. If you were in the position of one of the police officers who responded to that call, what would you be willing to do? What would you be willing to do? I think a few people thought that this was critiquing the police officers. No, not really. I thought they did, in this particular instance, they did a fine job. And you could hear the officer, I pointed that out yesterday, the officer who actually ended up firing the less lethal rounds. I mean, he did not want to even do that. And so you can hear them doing this math in real time. I think it's really illustrative, actually, of the positions that officers find themselves in every now and again, where they're trying to do this math on the fly. It's easy for us to sit around and pontificate and try to ponder the lint in our navel, which is exactly what we're doing. Let's give the officers credit for that. It's really easy for us, but even then, it's a difficult call. So I gave you 3 options. What are you willing to do if you were in the position of those officers? Less lethal, like what they used, deadly force, or neither? Here's what you had to say. Zach says it depends on the situation. Every scenario is different. And if they have the ability to use non-lethal rounds, I believe they should do so, especially with children being involved. Obviously, not every scenario is like this. Not to mention the use of deadly force would likely result in media outrage, and probably rightfully so, in my opinion. Well, this gets back to, though, are you really, that was a loaded gun, a real gun. It wasn't a BB gun. Are you really willing, Are you really willing to put your own children in the position of not having a father or a parent because other parents sucked at doing their job? And yeah, would you rather be judged by 12 than buried by 6? That's kind of what we're talking about here. At least that's the stakes at play. So Zach, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, in that moment, you have to think, on some level, those officers are saying, I don't care if we get lynched for this. I'll take my chances after this if these kids are going to really start firing bullets at me. Jeff says, keyword in your question for me is willing. That's correct. You deduced that correctly. I would expect that from my best friend from childhood, knowing exactly what the operative word was there. There's a quote, I can't remember where, from the bullet doesn't care who pulls the trigger. Kids are capable of killing. Everyone should be ready to defend themselves. That's kind of where I'm coming down on this, unfortunately. As terrible as that sounds. Now, having said that, I would exhaust every single non-lethal opportunity, non-lethal remedy, before I was actually willing to use that type of force. But if all of those were exhausted, and the kid pops around, points a loaded gun at me, sorry, that's awful. It's an awful situation. But that's kind of where I would come down on that as well. Jenna says the cops did a great job. Agree with that. Don't Drone Me Bro says, watching it one time and only knowing what is available in this 2-minute clip, the response seemed appropriate. Yeah, again, they did a good job. Follow Truth says, based on this video, I think the officers handled this appropriately. I would bet these boys have seen in real life, what no 7-year-old should see at this age. Yeah, that's also tragically true. Follow Truth says, was that mom asking her son to drop the gun and he refused? Parents should be arrested and prosecuted. Well, parents should be arrested and prosecuted. In this case, that seems pretty cut and dried, but there have been other cases around the country of, yes, older children, teenagers, who have taken their parents' weapons or stolen their parents' weapons and tried, or in some cases successfully carried out, mass shootings. Their parents were charged. Is it right then? Is it right to charge the parents then? I would say no, because those children, they're teenagers. You know, what constitutes an adult legally is not really the same thing biologically. So where's that cutoff point? So that's another stipulation here in terms of what should happen to the parents. Tom Cumber says, I think police officers handled a terrible situation the best way they could. Yep, again, I'm not asking you to critique the police here. I'm asking you what you would be willing to do in this situation. Deanna Vizentine says, it would depend on if the officer thought the kid could get off a lethal shot. In this incident, the officer chose the right response. River City says, beanbag. Yeah. ATB says, be willing to do. A police officer always has to be willing to meet lethal force with lethal force and intent. Their actions were appropriate, but they had to be willing to use lethal force if, say, one of the kids ran out firing at them. Exactly right. Exactly right. Tom Bazika says, in this situation, less lethal force is appropriate. Well, yeah, it's appropriate, but what are you willing to do if it was not sufficient? Erica says, less lethal if at all possible. Fred says, less lethal. The cops did a good job here. Arrest the parents. Again, are you sure you want to arrest the parents here? Because I've seen a lot of right-wingers say this is unjust when parents are arrested or charged when their older children take a gun and try to commit violent acts. So are you sure you want to do that? Sarah Hanna says the actions of the police were completely justified. Again, not asking you what you thought about what these cops did, but the way those boys were playing past the gun, one of them could have easily been shot. The beanbag rounds successfully scared and distracted the boys so that an officer could safely disarm them. Also glad they got cuffed. Joe Lynch says, we didn't have tasers back when I served. Honestly, probably would have taken my chances and tried to disarm without anything. I don't know that I could live with myself otherwise. But see, I'm sympathetic to that too. Even though I'm coming down on the side of, I would be willing, if it came down to it and all other options were exhausted, I'd be willing to use lethal force. I'm also sympathetic to this because that's undeniably true. Even if you were willing to, you have to live with the aftermath of that, both personally, professionally, and publicly. Todd says, based on the video, that boy was going to shoot. The rubber bullet should make the reality of the situation clear to him and both of them. The situation was resolved, preserving life. God help the boys. Amen to that. Andy W. says, I voted less lethal, but I'm making it hurt. Good point, because I don't think either of those rounds actually hit the kids. Sudden adult death season says, not a law officer of any kind, but I would want to put the fear of God into those kids because by the video, it looks as if nobody is. Yeah, I mean, canine unit, again, a canine could be very, very, long-term harmful to the kids as well, but that's better than dying or shooting. John says, that's a rough one. I selected number 2. That would be deadly force. John says he selected number 2 because I'm willing to do that rather than get shot. I'd certainly try less lethal first, but what are the options? Tear gas, pepper bombs? Daniel says, I'd use the same force applied in the video. Then I'd do the exact same thing to the parents because how do kids that young get a loaded gun in their hands like that? I know. So what do you do with the parents here? What do you do with the parents? Obviously, I think on firearms charges, I think maybe a separate conversation because I think some of the cases that I'm thinking about where parents have been charged, I think they've been charged for like manslaughter and things of that, which is not necessarily appropriate because they weren't the ones doing the killing, in my estimation. But obviously, the parents have to be charged with something here. They have to. I agree with that. It depends on what the what is. Live Free or Die says, tear gas, pepper spray, and or taser. They're kids who by no fault of their own are playing dangerously and may have been brainwashed to hate police given the circumstances. There will be outcry no matter what, so publicly arrest the adults no matter the outcome. Got a lot of responses to this poll of the week. I appreciate each and every one of you. Back at it again tomorrow.
This has been the AM Update Week in Review. The AM Update will be back on Monday and every weekday at 4 a.m. Eastern Time.